Hello, everyone. It's Michael Jaco with Unleashing Intuition Secrets. Here we have Leo Zagami back with us again. He's always very informative. This one is a very good one. We're going to be talking about ETs in the Vatican. Wow, what a combination! And of course, Leo has the deepest insights that are very informative and are going to take us to another level. And you actually have a new book. Is that correct?
A new book, which is basically the Vatican's top secret alien agenda. And this is a book that is already been #1 in the UFO section of Amazon. So if you want to get your copy, you can do it. It's available on Amazon, and you can also, of course, go and check out, let's say, a synthesis of it on my website, leozagami.com, together with my latest articles based on this groundbreaking book, which is in collaboration with the Italian Centro Ufologico Nazionale, the Ufological National Center of Italy, which was born almost 60 years ago, and his co-founder Roberto Pinotti, who has been my mentor in this field and one of the most eminent ufologists in the world. So we have definitely a lot to discuss, especially because we are seeing one more dump after the other regarding these UAP files, as they call them today. And there is definitely groundbreaking revelations connecting this whole disclosure and the control of the narrative by the Vatican.
Yeah, very good. So here's a picture of the book, Exposing the Vatican's Top Secret Alien Agenda, Antidote to Spielberg's PSYOP. So you're going to give us a lot of insights here. So
yeah, I was actually privy to information, don't ask me how, regarding the script of Steven Spielberg's movie. And so I created an antidote with this book. You can actually already read about the movie in this book in real time as you go and see it. Hidden Encounters, Forbidden Rituals, and Jesuit Astronomers in the Age of UFO Disclosure. It's the only book that talks about this topic of great importance, because you see, we have in the last 9 years since that famous TikTok video appeared, and then the article on the New York Times, suddenly we had these people popping out of nowhere, like Luis Elizondo from the Pentagon, or David Grush later on in 2023. But in reality, they are all Jesuit informers and disinfo agents. But in reality, I will call them gatekeepers, because it's not fair to call them disinfo agents. They are actually trying to control the narrative. So they try to do it in a way that is preparing for ultimate disclosure, but they will never give you the ultimate form of disclosure, because it's a problem that concerns, of course, as you can imagine, national security, because this whole thing is connected with what we call the legacy program. Now, the legacy program is a program of reverse engineering, which links the CIA, the United States Air Force, and the defense contractors. And they don't really have an intention to fully disclose everything, but they are definitely creating a lot of theater around it. And there is now, I don't know if you saw the latest nomination of Avi Loeb, who is supposed to be in charge of this scientific committee, that finally, they say, oh, Avi Loeb is a guy who was always fighting the system about this. And it's like they are creating false narratives. Like, for example, Jeremy Corbell. Nobody knew who he was 10 years ago. Now, he's the guy that with his new documentary film is portrayed like the martyr of ufology, risking his life to give us all the truths. So I'm trying here to demystify and create the reality here of this disclosure. You understand, Michael? Because when I published the previous book regarding this subject, which was Invisible Master, I then inserted my first take on certain things, but we were just at the beginning of it all. But I thought it was perfect at that moment to give a different look and a different prospect. And it actually went very well. But when I arrived here in the United States, and the first place where I ended was Contact in the Desert, I kind of like, it smelled of government spooks all over the place. And I wanted to really understand who was controlling these UFO conferences, who was behind it all. And in the end, I discovered it was, of course, the Vatican. And this year, like I write in my book, Daniel Sheehan, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's like a famous UFO advocate, but also a very famous attorney, a little bit progressive liberal. He used to be a Jesuit. He was a former Jesuit novitiate who left the Jesuits, became for 10 years their legal advisor of the Jesuit headquarters, and at the same time became the instigator for a lot of the UFO movement that we have here in the United States today. He is the lawyer of Luis Elizondo, he is the lawyer of Stephen Greer. So you see, everything is controlled here. In my book, you can see how David Grush is actually a complete puppet who says, oh, yes, I follow Professor Pasulka, the late Professor Tigman. Now, for normal people, they will not really understand what that means. But David Grush is a Catholic and is a Jesuit agent, just as another figure that you might have heard of that is actually one of the major gatekeepers of the whole game here. Al Puthoff of the Stargate project that used to be, of course, involved with the whole remote viewing thing, you know? Mm-hmm. So the DIA, the CIA, the whole show then provided us what we saw in The Man Who Stared at Goats, that famous film. That it's one of the few films I can actually see with George Clooney that doesn't make me puke because he's usually such a lefty Scrooge in his movies. I can't stand it. But that movie is actually a very good movie that needs to be seen. So I agree. My intention with this book was this. There was a lot of material that was not accessible in the English-speaking world, because it was only published in Italy and France. And these researchers were not American, and they never really... So I contacted Roberto Pinotti, and then thanks to him, I was able to also access the work of Alfredo Lissoni, who is a professor of religion who in the early 2000s was able to research the UFO, the UAP as they call it, phenomenon now, the UAP, but I always call it UFO because in the end, let's call it UFO to be more, it's more simple.
Yeah. I think they do that on purpose to confuse us.
It's a little bit, but I mean, there is some motivations for calling it UAP. I explain in this book. One of the main motivation is the plasmic non-human intelligence, the so-called orbs, various orbs that also communicate at times with the people who interact with them. That is not really an object, nuts and bolts. So for that reason, you can actually have one of these orbs inside your home. Now, you can't really have a UFO inside your living room, but you can have that in your living room. So that justifies, in a way, the name UAP. But aside from that, we still prefer the old one. So what happened was that the Vatican archives are 53 miles under the Vatican of archives, of secret archives, often regarding the cases of beatification or sanctification of saints. So when you are actually making a saint, you have to evaluate all the paranormal phenomena around it. And often it included also what we now call UAP. So the whole thing regarding the Vatican is that they have one of the biggest archives that contains the mysteries of it all. And I wanted to have access to it, but it was impossible for me. Thanks to this guy called Alfredo Lissoni, who is a professor of religion, he went inside there asserting he was studying Christian legends. So, if he said he was studying UFOs or UAP, they would have not let him in. But he was able to go in. aside from the 53 miles of the secret Vatican archives, now known as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, there is also a Vatican library. And the Vatican library is another 23 miles of material. Now, the archives contain mostly all the various correspondence with heads of states for the last 1,000 years, the Vatican, every secret possible and imaginable, also, like we said, for the cause of beatification or sanctification of states. But then you have also the books, the forbidden books, the books that at times us normal folk are never meant to read. And of course, the level of security that they have to accede to these archives, which I have put in the front. You see, this is actually an image from the Secret Vatican Archive.
Wow.
And imagine it's 53 miles of this stuff.
Good God.
So I was able to include a lot of research done in the archives, but at the same time, I was also able to expose those people that the Vatican is using for this disclosure project. Now, we know that the heads of the New World Order, as I always said, you know, in my last two books, the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists, okay? Now, the film of Steven Spielberg is exactly that. The script by Steven Spielberg, who is, of course, a well-known sympathizer of Chabad Lubavitch and the Sabbatean Frankists, and at the same time, the screenplay by a guy, David Coep, who is a Catholic Jesuit agent who has inserted in the movie a lot of these Jesuit references, like, for example, one of the protagonists is a former nun, or there is a nun in a monastery that talks about extraterrestrials, and she actually cites a phrase given by a famous Catholic saint. So all this is very much constructed in a way that we embrace the extraterrestrials as our friends, regardless of their danger. This is very important because, you see, the Vatican, like I explain in my book, started preparing for disclosure in the 1950s, actually in the 1930s.
Wow.
And I have documents to prove that, because you remember when David Grush came out in front of Congress in 2023, and he said then that there was, of course, reverse engineering, this and that. And then later on, he went on record with some newspapers and media, and he said the Pope Pius XII was involved in the retrieval of a UFO in northern Italy in 1933 that Mussolini had taken, and then thanks to him, the UFO ended up in the hands of the Americans after the war. In my book, I have the original documents from Mussolini.
Wow.
Ordering the journalist Absolute Science, and these documents were given to us by this guy who is no longer alive, who is the grandson of Mussolini, whose father was killed by his father-in-law because he betrayed him, Galeazzo Ciano. So this guy, Fabrizio Ciano, at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, he started, before he died, of course, to send these documents out to some researchers that I know, Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni, and then also another guy called Bongiovanni. He said he did it in a very mysterious way. He didn't want, and also to some newspaper, but he didn't want to, you know, it wasn't only regarding the UFO crash in Magenta. It was also regarding a series of UFO events. And these are all official documents, forensically analyzed. So there is no debunking. The guy who analyzed it is this guy here in the center, who used to be one of Italy's most known forensic analysts. The guy who did the book, collaborated with me, he was in the military, working with NATO. He founded 60 years ago this Italian ufologic center. And so when he was working for the 3rd Battalion of Nuclear Missile, which, of course, at that point you have as you know, a very high up security clearance, the American officers of NATO that were involved with him went to him and said, we know that you like this subject. He was actually presenting it formally to the Italian, I think it was a armed forces event that he organized with the Italian armed forces. So these Americans went then and they said to Roberto, well, we have actually retrieved UFOs in America, and we have the bodies of aliens. This was actually in the early 70s this happened. So from there on, Roberto, of course, was already a firm believer and became even a bigger believer. But how did he become a believer? Okay, Roberto is born in 1944, the same year as my mother. In 1954, something very strange happened in Florence. During a soccer match, suddenly, a massive amount of UFOs appeared over the stadium. They had to interrupt the soccer match in the end because of all these UFOs over Florence. So imagine interrupting a soccer match in Italy is like interrupting a mass. I mean, Italians, for them, soccer is a religion. They were all watching in the sky and nobody was watching the match anymore. So then at that point, the referee had to interrupt the match. And then they picked up when all this UFO activity eventually will disappear. It was at that point, he was 10 years old, he understood, he's grown up a passion for it. But in 1954, the day after this happened in Florence, the American ambassador also witnessed these UFOs over Rome. And this American ambassador became also very relevant in this story because she was connected with President Eisenhower. And President Eisenhower will actually allegedly have a couple of close encounters of the third kind in the early 50s with both the Greys and the Nordics. But in 1954, the most interesting thing was that the Vatican, there was one of the ambassadors for the Vatican, a guy called Alberto Perego, who was there in St. Peter's Square. Suddenly, he sees a squadron of 40 UFOs over St. Peter's Square.
Wow.
At that point, that's when the Vatican exopolitical game started. That's when we finally have the birth of the exopolitical interest, which then becomes even more important and relevant a few years later, when a pope that had been initiated in a lodge and then had this contact experience, a guy called Roncalli, who will become Pope John the 23rd, in July 1961 had himself an encounter of the third kind in Castel Gandolfo. This is a pope, the pope who gave birth to the Second Vatican Council. And so before starting the council, he meets with an extraterrestrial. That changed the whole course of the council and what it was supposed to mean for the church. In fact, you remember how many times we have discussed the importance of the Second Vatican Council in the creation of the one world religion? Many times on your show, many times, because I've discussed in volume 12, I've discussed in other books, in volume 7. It's always been a very important topic for me, the fact that the Vatican is gathering together all these faiths. But what is the reason? The reason is that once you have disclosure, automatically everybody goes to the religious leader, not to their politicians. And so the Vatican, wanted to prepare for that. Now you have the evangelicals who, as you know, there was an accident that happened just in May, at the end of May, in which a famous politician had allegedly said certain things. And that alleged politician said these things to a group of pastors that came together. Then one of these pastors went on the air during a podcast and said, well, I can't tell you who he was, but what he said was so scary, and we were all scared. Then, like a few days after, he had to basically do a whole disclaimer about it, because, of course, the man in black had gone to him, and he was like forced into damage control. There is actually a video I have of this guy, and he looks, yes, it was not the words of this politician, it was my words. So let's understand who this politician was and what was said. The politician was Congressman Eric Burleson, who's been one of the most outspoken Republican members regarding the UAP disclosure. Just a few days ago, they were on the stairs of Congress, you remember, with David Grush also and many other, Paulina Luna, and it was a bipartisan effort. We saw David Grush at the podium of this task force on the declassification of federal secrets that on June 9, admitted, and there was also bullshit, of course, that somebody's mentioning in the chat. These people didn't blink an eye when David Grush said, we have aliens, alive aliens.
Wow.
No, we're not talking about reverse engineering and spaceships, which was already something. We're talking about live biological material of a non-terrestrial origin. And this, of course, was said by somebody who had the highest level of security clearance, like David Grush. But David Grush can say those things because he's authorized by the Jesuits. So my point in making this book was to explain who is behind Luis Elizondo, David Grush, all the people that were the Sierra Content in the desert, George Knapp, Jeremy Corbyn, every single person, every time you put the TV on, you get the same people. It's like a mantra.
Stephen Greer.
Stephen Greer is a massive Vatican stooge. In fact, just 3 weeks ago, he admitted, I was in the Vatican and I stayed in the apartment over St. Peter's Square of Monsignor Balducci. He admitted it. He admitted that he stays in the apartment with this guy, and this guy, well, we know him because this is Monsignor Balducci, where Stephen Greer stayed in the Vatican. The guy next to him is the guy I made the book with, Roberto Pinotti.
Wow.
He wrote the preface for one of his books. So to actually, it's quite incredible because when there was Content in the Desert this year, if you all go on YouTube, there is a site, for Content in the Desert. You have one of the rare public videos that you can find there, because otherwise you have to go on the paying of the website, and you have to pay for viewing the various lectures. There is one lecture that is public, and it's Daniel Sheehan. And he admits in front of the cameras, when one guy says, so what about the Vatican? He says, Pope Leo XIV has invited me to Castel Gandolfo.
Wow.
And he admitted that all the ufologic movement, even before Content in the Desert, he was there from the start. That means the Jesuits were there from the start.
Wow. So you also say, and I can't wait to read your book. I have it. I've already downloaded it.
I know that you are an avid reader, and I can't wait for you to read it because I know that it's going to be a follow-up to this interview. It's going to be massive.
Zachariah Sitkin.
Absolutely, man.
Oh my God. The Anunnaki Chronicles, the 12th Planet. I read all those books, and he's involved here in the Vatican. Oh my God.
Photos. I mean, I'm bringing the receipts here. This guy next to him is a P2 member that I know very well.
Wow.
Gianmario Ferramonti was the co-founder with me of Italians for Time, so I know him very well. Gianmario Ferramonti became the guy who brought the evidence. You see, after Zachariah Sitchin met with Monsignor Balducci, the guy who met with Stephen Greer, the guy I showed you earlier.
Wow.
After they met, they started to exchange material. even alien material.
Hmm.
And this guy, who is Gianmario Ferramonti, who has also a background in technology, was functioning as the guy who would bring the material from Zaccaria Sitchin to Balducci, from Balducci to Zaccaria Sitchin.
Good God. Wow.
So in my book, I also talk, and nobody knows this aside from very few people, Zaccaria Sitchin had an encounter of the third kind that saved his life.
Really?
He was about to die of an illness. He didn't know he had this illness.
Mm-hmm.
One night, an Anunnaki showed in front of his bed.
Wow.
And he said, you have to have immediately this operation. I think it was, I'm not sure, it could be the heart, but something else. He said, you have to have immediately this operation. And it saved his life.
Good gosh.
What
Wow.
happened with Zaccaria Sitchin is that he then relayed the same tale also, not only to Gianmario Ferramonti, but also to Jordan Maxwell. And, I knew Jordan Maxwell because the late Jordan Maxwell used to live nearby.
Wow.
And Jordan Maxwell confirmed to me that Zaccaria Sitchin had this happening. So very few people know about this encounter of the third kind of Zaccaria Sitchin.
Yeah, good. Wow. You've rubbed elbows with a lot of amazing people. And I always wondered, it's like he's always talking about, we got this information from cuneiform tablets. I'm like, come on, you got all this stuff from these ancient tablets. So now we know you got the information, you got it handed to him on a silver platter. Wow.
Well, he was definitely able to bring his research one step further once he could accede to the Vatican archives. Like we just said earlier in the show, they are a very important part here. For example, the Vatican has some major gatekeepers that work for them, like we said, David Grush, but not only David Grush. Professor Pasulka, for example, I don't know if you ever heard of her. She is a professor of religious studies who has published a book which is now very powerful and deemed very influential, called American Cosmic. In the book American Cosmic, she doesn't really confirm who are these people, the characters. She makes fictional names for them. I put the real names in my book, and they are big shots. Like one of the people that is involved with, because Pasulka was a professor of religious studies, that one day was after she met with Jacques Vallée, who became her mentor. Jacques Vallée is a very influential figure because Jacques Vallée works for the Legacy Program. The Legacy Program, I repeat, is the Department of Energy, which is the descendant of the Manhattan Project, the CIA, and the various defense contractors. As soon as they see a UFO, they need to get it, because that, and sometimes they actively work with these remote viewers to bring down these UFOs. So they could, because the problem in my book, I show how there is a UAP reverse engineering program in the United States, in Russia, and in China. Now, this week, they confirmed, even New York Post confirmed that's true. And so it's not, and in my book, though, I actually show who was directing this. Because, for example, this guy here, you see with all these medals, a Soviet, Lieutenant Colonel Sabin. He is used to be in the Soviet times the head of the Unit 10,003, unit of remote viewers. On the other side of the Atlantic, doing exactly the same job as he was doing, there was this other guy who nowadays you see at times, like in the Age of Disclosure documentary. Have you ever seen this guy? This guy is Al Puthoff. Al Puthoff is the guy who wants to classify a reality, wants to limit our truth. He's extremely controlling of everything. His level of security clearance is on top of the current president of the United States. So when you have Trump saying, well, there is these pilots who told me this and that, the problem, like I explain in my book, is like, and this was confirmed not only in the film Disclosure Day, but also by Marco Rubio in the documentary The Age of Disclosure, they are informed only on a need-to-know basis. So they don't really know anything. They know what they, the minimum they can know. Of course, there has been some presidents more involved, like, for example, in 1973, Nixon had a direct encounter of the fair kind, or Eisenhower. But this doesn't happen with every president. So it's very important to realize that at the moment, the Vatican is in a state of panic. I explain what is happening because the Secretary of State of the Vatican has now forbidden any representative of the Vatican to discuss the topic. 10 years ago, the Pope was actually saying, oh, let's baptize an extraterrestrial. Then we had, of course, the Jesuits, who even wrote a book about baptizing extraterrestrials, the Jesuits from the Specula Vaticana, this guy in particular, Guy Consolmagno. The Pope now has gone back to the summer usually the summer residence of the Pope, since Pope Francis had transformed it in a museum in 2016, was not really relevant anymore. But it was at the same time the headquarters of the astronomical section of the Jesuits, called the Specula Vaticana, of the Vatican Observatory. That Vatican Observatory is one of the most advanced in the world and is connected directly to Mount Graham in Arizona, where they have very important telescopes, including then that infrared that covers the actual telescope, which was known as Lucifer and now is known as Lucy. They actually have two of those, Lucy 1 and 2 now. Right. But the Vatican didn't want this association with the name Lucifer. So they scrapped it off their website. They said, no, it's a consortium of German universities. We have nothing to do with it. I exposed them. I have the links, the documents. So, but the problem is that there is some connections here that are absolutely mind-blowing. Let me show you something. These are pictures that are pretty shocking. Now, the one on the left is a young Al Puthoff next to Phil Corso. Phil Corso, you heard of Phil Corso? The guy who talked about reverse engineering in Roswell. He was in Roswell.
Okay.
This is Alexander, John B. Alexander, the guy from the Stargate project, the colonel who was in charge of the various psychological operations, but he was mainly in charge of the Stargate project also. And next to him, you have also a very young George Knapp. This photo is unique, but the photo here on top is also unique. In this photo, the guy in the center is Teller, one of the main people of the Manhattan Project. You see, all these so-called UFO crashes happened where? In New Mexico. It's not only Roswell.
Yep.
So let's go back to that Professor Pasulka that I was discussing earlier with you. Why is she so important? Because she became the disciple of Jacques Vallée. After that, she was blindfolded and brought to a crash site in New Mexico where she was given evidence. But she was not alone. She was with a new guy who operates a front for the CIA, which is currently employed internationally for this disclosure. It's called the Soul Foundation. He's called Gary Nolan. And together with Professor Scatfish, they're in charge of the Soul Foundation. Have you ever heard of the Soul Foundation?
Mm-mm.
Please go on Google and put Soul, S-O-L Foundation. It's going to blow your mind what these people are doing in front of our eyes. Because they have done a secret meeting last year in Italy, but the previous meetings were here in California. And the Soul Foundation is, like I said, a front organization of the CIA.
Oh, wow.
And see what they're doing. Science, policy, and public education for the post-UAP world. They're already preparing for after the UAP is revealed, the aliens are revealed.
Wow. So
it's very much advanced, this whole thing. Now, bringing Professor Pasulka to this UFO crash site. Professor Pasulka is also, you see, the people involved. These are all CIA shields. Go from the top. The guy Gary Nolan. That guy there worked with classified stuff. He's the biggest expert of orbs and on non-human intelligence. The guy next to him is Peter Scafish, which is a really big deal in this world of the controlled disclosure by the Vatican. So this, and then you have Professor Pasulka, who was blindfolded and made the convert to the UFO, because these people actually have evidence. They actually are the ones working with the legacy program. So my book is exposing something that nobody has ever exposed before. Then you have Jennifer Preston, which is, these are all CIA shields. You know, I mean, you've been in the CIA. You know how they operate.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not telling you anything new.
They have a lot of, they want complete control over this UAP, UFO.
But then remember, Catholics in Action, CIA.
That's I'm starting to see that now. Another thing that really surprised me in your second chapter, you talk about Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake, and I thought he was burned at the stake because of his heliocentric views, and he wouldn't recant. But you're saying there's some kind of UFO connection?
Well, he made a whole book called The Infinito Universi et Mondium, the infinite universe on the worlds, where he was basically stating that there were other inhabited worlds. That was not for the Vatican something you could accept. Imagine that he was actually brought on the stake in Campo dei Fiori with a thing over his mouth, like
so he
couldn't even talk to anybody and say anything. You see? Now, let me tell you a little bit about Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno was a monk, first of all, no?
A Benedictine, right?
No, he was, I think he was actually Dominican. If I don't get it wrong. He was basically a guy who, as a monk, was very, very well versed in things.
Brilliant guy. I read a lot of his stuff. I didn't know about that book though. That's pretty wild.
I think that actually I have probably all of his books here.
Wow.
So I mean, I have actually some rare ones that
I gotta come visit someday. Jeez.
One day, no, I have to show you one day one of these books, because they have also, he used to make also images that looked like the ones that later we will have in the, how you call them?
Flying saucer.
No, the ones on in the field, the images that you find in
yeah, the crop circles.
Yes, crop circles.
Wow.
Crop circles, yes, crop circles, because crop circles. Now, is an interesting thing regarding crop circles. So you see, in the movie Disclosure Day, at one point, you actually see this guy who, while he's talking on the phone, the crop circle is forming around him.
Wow.
In my book, I explain that actually there was an image that was drawn. I think, let me see if I can find you the name. There is actually an image, a specific image made a few centuries ago called, I think, the Morning Devil, of a demon making this crop circle in England. Let me see if I can find it for you. The Mowing Devil is called. It's actually.
So it's from centuries ago. Wow.
Yeah, let me show you, so we can actually show it to your public. You see, that is actually a demon.
Yeah, I've seen that before. That's wild.
And they're actually doing a crop circle.
They had to explain it some way, because when they couldn't explain it, they said it's demons.
Well, that is the interesting thing about, you see, the whole book, because I try to be as biased as possible on this unbiased. You say unbiased? Yes, unbiased. Not biased, but unbiased. I try to give an idea to the people of what the various, the Catholics think in a certain way, the Orthodox in another, the Evangelicals in another. They each have their own take at the moment on what are these beings. But one thing that is rather shocking is the attitude of the Vatican, because the Vatican is the only one that is all embracing. I mean, why do they have so much certainty? Is because of the story that I narrate in this book. After the first crash retrieval, there was, of course, Roswell, and the Vatican sent immediately one of the most eminent representatives at the time to Roswell. So the Vatican knew about Roswell, and then there were James Francis Cardinal McIntyre, who died in 1979. He was an archbishop here in Los Angeles, was actually in Roswell. There were two sites, not one, by the way. And he went there, and then he went to talk about it with the Pope, who in the meantime had already given the UFO that they had recovered in northern Italy. That's when the reverse engineering project started. Then in the early 50s, they formalized it and made it into what eventually became known as the Legacy Program. Then what happened in the early 70s was that they started the remote viewing projects, both because they saw that in Soviet Union they were doing similar things with telekinesis and stuff. So they started, and as soon as they started in 1971, 72, in 1973 they came to the conclusion that non-human intelligence was interfering with their operations, and that the remote viewers were getting contact with actual aliens. At the beginning, it wasn't called Stargate Project. It would be eventually called Stargate Project only in 1991. And it was called Stargate Project once the whole alien thing took over the show of these remote viewers. People like Ingo Swann, various remote viewers like Pat Buchanan, those people that's, became a way for them to connect with these beings, just like the Russians were doing. Wow. In Russia, they connected through the work of Colonel Sabin. And then the Vatican, you see, this whole disclosure that we are living today with Trump actually started at the end of the Obama presidency. It started when John Podesta made his famous post on Twitter claiming that he could have more regarding the disclosure. After that, he thought, fortunately we didn't have Hillary becoming president, but while he was chairman of the Hillary campaign, he went to Rome to talk with the Vatican about it, and to talk with this organization that was then connected to Russia. They talk often about Trump and his links to Russia, but nobody talks about John Podesta and these people and their links to Russia, which were much more closer to something that, and this organization that they were creating in Russia that is now being put on pause because of the war in Ukraine, this organization that is actually directed in Moscow by Vladimir Putin, wanted to become like the Bilderberg of the ufologists. But of course, after the war of Ukraine started to erupt, then they had to put everything on hold. But the Jesuits were involved, and my friend Roberto Pinotti was actually called, and he went 2 times in Moscow. And in Moscow, he actually saw the Vatican representatives there. I mean, I have photos here. So, and documents, so that people can see that we are talking about things that are not speculation. This is actually Roberto Pinotti with Lieutenant Colonel Sabin, the head of the remote viewers, who were working during the SETCA program in Soviet Union. And in my book, I have also some very interesting testimonies about how there was similar things to what was going on here. And then, of course, you have also the Chinese who nowadays have one of the most advanced space programs, but only thanks to the Jesuits. Let's not forget the Jesuits were the ones who almost 500 years ago went to China and brought them astronomy, and they educated them on astronomy. So, of course, they became very important. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, we're going all the way back to, Bruno,
Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno was one of the most eminent astronomers.
1500, something crazy. So we're all the way back there.
Galileo time. Yeah. There was, of course, the whole thing about the heliocentric, like you said before, no? That was one of the main reasons. But then you had also Galileo Galilei, you had then later on Copernicus. I mean, the thing is that the church...
They were put in, house arrest. But
the crazy thing, if you think about it, today, the Jesuits are the ones who are actually getting you to embrace the extraterrestrial, wanting to be at the forefront of this disclosure and all that. Back then, they were the ones silencing people and killing them, because one of the main people who sent Giordano Bruno on the stake, like I say in my book, was a Jesuit. So the Jesuits went from being the ones who silenced everybody to the ones who instead now are trying to, they are still silencing everybody, but they're directing now the narrative to a more open situation. In fact, Guy Consolmagno, who is currently the director of the foundation of the Vatican Observatory, he said that we should listen to what was said in the Peter's survey of 2008. Now, in my book, the 4th chapter is dedicated to these two surveys that were conducted, one in the middle of the 90s, financed by Robert Bigelow, and conducted by the Alexanders. The other one is called the Peter Survey of 2008. These two surveys were basically made so to understand how the various different religious denominations of Christianity, but also Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, will react once disclosure is announced. And then they came with the official narrative. Of course, that is, I think, a little bit doubtful, because they said, oh, the Americans have, they had like 100 priests answering questions, a survey, just to see how they will all, the various pastors, how they will react, the various rabbis. In the end, they came to the conclusion that, yes, the American people are mature enough to take it, no problem. I don't think so, because then you have a bunch of other people who are saying exactly the contrary, including Jacques Vallée. So it's kind of a little bit weird.
Yeah. Well, when I was in the CIA, there was a guy that was disclosing. He was on Carrie Cassidy. You've probably seen some of her stuff. She reveals a lot of stuff on the UFO stuff. But he came on. It was Bill Broadbreaker, and he was a former. He claimed to be, former SEAL. He was involved in programs that were, in Area 51. He worked with the Greys. He worked with this system that you could see the future on it. And I was like, I kind of validated the guy. And from that, my life turned upside down. They came after me to destroy my life. So the CIA still is, suppressing this. Now you say the Jesuits are like, oh yeah, it's like, we like the ET stuff now, and they're cool. But on the other hand, you got the CIA basically still trying to suppress this stuff and kill people that are involved in it.
Well, I think we're going towards something big, though, if you think about it, because now a lot of people say, but why now? Well, one of the main reasons is that a lot of things have happened since we have reverse engineered this technology. This technology is the technology that has brought us the AI, the data centers. We went from Project Stargate being a remote viewing program to Project Stargate being a data center program, and it's all connected.
Wow.
So now that we have the technology, we are basically fallen in their own trap, because they have built a digital prison around us, and they don't need to come with the UFOs like Independence Day, when they are basically owning the AI. Now, Avi Loeb, the guy who I told you is a major shield, he actually works for Shin Bet, for the Israel military intelligence, but he also acts like the scientist who knows it all, and now he's going to be in charge of the scientific committee on UAP. This guy said that if the aliens come on Earth, they will connect with our AI. Well, my thesis is they actually gave us these things, so we build the AI, and there's no need of connecting the AI, because basically the AI is their product. So we are already screwed up, because we bring an alien in our pocket every time we have a smartphone. Now, now you might think that that is not real, but actually it is real, and I tell you why. Because when we hear the history of how the AI developed, and how, the whole history, well, I mean, in the end, what we are having now is a product that is definitely changing our reality. Anthropic, for example, has been embraced like the good AI by the Vatican, who made the encyclicas. Wow, the encyclica, big thing. Or the Pope has embraced the AI, but the good AI. And then ChatGPT is the evil AI. And then they say that Anthropic will not be used for military. That's nonsense. They already said that every time there will be a special operation like Venezuela, they will be using Anthropic. So that's it. They are just selling us a lie regarding the good and bad AI, because there is no good and bad AI. There just is a one AI that is going to control everything by 2030. And in my book, well, I don't want to give out too much, but in the end, you will understand that from next year onwards, something really special is starting, and it's going to last 7 years. And in that alignment with Sirius, that's the moment in which they will take over the whole show.
Wow. So yeah, they have to have these alignments. They're all into that stuff.
There's a ritual that is going to take place, and it's going to last 7 years. A ritual takes 7 years, and it's going to take place in the heart of Africa.
Interesting. Yeah, you've given us some really good tidbits in this book, and yeah, definitely appreciate it. So what do you think the future is? We're going to be able to like avoid the UFO control system that they're trying to spring on us, or what?
Well, you see, it's about really a situation that they have devised for a very long time. So whereby by the time we are finally, disclosure is starting now. It's not going to be given to us in 1 year. It's going to probably take a few years. But by the time they give us the full picture, the world will have already changed, and we will have been impossibilitated to react in any way against their interest. Because that is their problem. They want to maintain control over us. The governments know that once the alien disclosure happens, well, a lot of people will say, who cares about the president? Who cares? I mean, these guys, they're more powerful. So that is what they want to avoid. You understand? They want to avoid the fact that people might reject not only religion, because there will be people who will also be driven to think that these are the saviors of mankind, because that is also the false perception that the Jesuits want to bring us. You understand? So think about the fact that on one side you have people like J.D. Vance, who initially said they were demons. Yeah?
Right. I was going to ask you. Good. Thank you.
That is the topic that I opened the book with.
Right. Okay.
But then, once that this whole thing started, then the disclosure is starting, even Vance had to kind of a little bit, because the demon, just when it was a couple of weeks ago, an exorcist who used to be an intelligence officer, Monsignor Rossetti, you heard about it, no? In the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., kicked them out as exorcist after 19 years. And because he said that the aliens were demons.
Right.
So the Orthodox, they continue to say the aliens are
That's
demons.
just disinformation. They're like just seeding disinformation. They've always been doing that, though.
Well, I mean, the thing is this, of course, we can't expect that every single extraterrestrial, interdimensional being or extra-dimensional being is a positive being. There
Sure.
might actually be fallen angels. There might
Absolutely.
actually be demons.
Yep.
But of course, good and evil is reflected at a universal level. So if you have 4 races, there might be a race that is inclined to be more demonic and more evil than another one that is more angelic and more, you know, even us humans, we are given the choice. We can go and become the monsters that at times we do become, or we can become some very good and positive beings, but it is up to us. We have been given this choice. Other races might not have that choice. They might go by the will of the single, like, the queen bee. So there is a lot of things that will change in the coming years. And for me, it was important by doing this book that people finally know who is controlling the whole thing, the narrative. That when you put on the TV, you don't simply become a passive spectator of what is the biggest change in human history and the biggest event. Because I have decided with this book to abandon my interest in politics. I'm all interested in exopolitics.
Awesome.
Do you think that it's relevant if this president or this other president does something when in reality there is something else that controls the whole agenda? I mean, think about it. Xi Jinping, Putin, Trump, they know already that we are not alone. They might each have, more information regarding a subject than the other, but in reality, they know. And that is what also, a lot of this at the top level of our society these days, they are actually moving, knowing about this great revolution that will occur with this disclosure. That's why a guy like Luis Elizondo has built a bunker. That's why Peter Thiel has constructed a secret society that is actually controlling and preparing for World War III, and at the same time, Peter Thiel has moved the family to Buenos Aires and says, as soon as China or Russia does something, I am going to Buenos Aires. I'm going to Argentina. I don't want to stay here in America. So this is not really...
Not encouraging.
Not encouraging. Not encouraging. Absolutely.
Not at all. Wow. All right, Leo. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks for the information. Guys, get out and get that book. It's going to be, just like all of his books, it's going to be incredibly insightful and revelatory and take you to the next level in consciousness, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my intention is for you and everybody else to read this book, because I really feel that it's for us important to not be manipulated on this subject, that we have actually the freedom to decide where to go on this subject. If this is really, I mean, the fact that Steven Spielberg has sold us the gray aliens that for decades the abductees have referred to as being evil, as being good. And at one point, we even had a child play with E.T. Oh, wow, E.T., what a nice little...
E.T. phone home.
E.T. phone home and the whole thing. And then you have Encounters of the Third Kind with everybody's deliberately, and these grays, they're all nice. And then, in the last movie, at the end of the movie, they are even bringing out of retirement E.T. on a wheelchair almost, because that's what it is. We have E.T. arriving in a wheelchair for the final disclosure. Now, disclosure could happen in 2 ways at this point. by the government giving us their own version, and of course, finally telling us that we are not alone and that we have aliens that are actually currently even in laboratories owned by the military industrial complex. Or we could have, and I hope that actually is the best solution, that finally one of these alien races manifest themselves, because then it's not anymore in the hands of the governments to control the narrative. Then it's our hands, just, once they are in front of us. But that is not possible, because a lot of these races have treaties of not intervention on the affairs of a primitive species like us. So that is unfortunate. But let's see what's going to happen. Thank you so much for having me on today. And the Vatican Top Secret Alien Agenda is something that we will be probably talking about for a long time. And also, once you read this book, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of other questions.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Leo. So always an honor. Thank you very much. And we'll see you guys next time.
God bless you all.
God bless.